What are the best tips for players in Pathfinder 2nd Edition? Which ones are good to know? And if you didn't know these tips, do you need them or a miracle? This is the Dominomicon, authored and hosted by me, Dominic. The Dominomicon is dedicated to all nerdy things, with my current obsession being the TTRPG Pathfinder 2nd Edition. In this video chapter, I'm going to give out what I believe are the most important tips for players in Pathfinder 2e. This video would work for newer players and advanced players as well, as there might be some things in here that you're not aware of. PF2e is notorious for being a particularly complex system. I don't think that's actually 100% the case. It's certainly more complex than a system such as Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, but overall, you only need to learn a few bits here and there to understand more or less how to play. This video exists to showcase some of the pieces of knowledge that really help you understand how to play this wonderful game. But before then, if you like this video and find it helpful and or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing. But for now, let's ride. Drop the beat. So Paizo recommends that players create a character concept before they consider, well, anything else. What this means is that rather than thinking, I should play as a fighter or a barbarian and what are the best feats for most damage, you should instead sit and think of a cool idea for a character you want to play as that might potentially last a while. And if you love the idea of a really cool dwarf in heavy armor that rushes in with a two-handed axe and batters things using combat tactics and skill, well, that's a great character concept. The reason this is so important is because campaigns in TTRPGs, as we all know, can go on for a while. And if you just end up picking a class because it gets a +2 to hit or because you want to combine this and that ability because it sounds OP, you may end up not enjoying yourself and may have to create a new character later on. And that creates a lot more issues than if you would have just followed your heart in the first place. And it's still entirely possible to start with a character concept even when you're joining an already established party. If you get told that the party needs a healer, don't immediately think, well, I better pick cleric then. Instead think, if I was to play some sort of healer character, what sounds awesome in my head right now? Imagine what sort of healer character would sound really fun and then make the game fit your concept. Due to the sheer amount of options in PF2e, you can pretty much think of any sort of character concept and build it. Doing things this way overall, in my opinion, will increase your enjoyment of playing the system, and there's a reason Paizo recommends it in the first part of creating a character in Player Core 1. And if you're worried about making a weak or crappy character, don't be. So long as you get a +3 or +4 in your primary attribute and try to go for +4, you pretty much cannot make a weak character no matter what you do. I'd actually say you'd have to go out of your way to make a character that's weak in PF2e. So build a character concept first to all your heart's extent and then make the system work for your concept. If this means creating a custom background, then c'est la vie. Definitely do not let backgrounds dictate your character choice. Before I get started on that though, let's move on. Generally speaking, just moving, flanking with allies, and attacking will get you through a decent chunk of battles in PF2e. It really doesn't have to be much more complicated than that if you don't want it to be. But if you really want to optimize the 3-action economy as best as possible, here's my advice. Remove enemy actions. I have explained this multiple times in a few of my videos, but if you can do things like move away from an enemy before it can do its 3-action combo on you, you're basically removing that enemy's core ability. This works especially well when you have a full party against just 1 or 2 strong enemies, as your party will have more actions available than they will, so spending a few to take away just 1 of theirs is still overall a win. There's also quite a few abilities such as skill actions and spells that are quite good at taking away enemy actions, but again, this is for more advanced players and you only really need to start looking at these options once you're ready for them. And in the case of there being lots of little annoying enemies, well then the standard rules for combat games applies here. Try to kill them as quickly as possible by focus attacking one at once when you can. Moving forwards, getting enemies off guard to your attacks is incredibly powerful in this system. We all know about the 4 degrees of success, and being off guard is the perfect way to exploit that amazingly well-designed system idea. The easiest way to do this, as you more than likely know, is to flank your enemies with your allies. And there are abilities that allow you to flank enemies without an ally, so consider those as well. You can also do things like use your animal companion to flank enemies, and this is where summoning becomes quite good as well. Being able to spend 3 actions to make an enemy off guard to all your allies without a saving throw, which is essentially what a summon can do, is quite frankly very underrated. Sadly, for ranged characters, it's a little bit harder to get enemies off guard to you. But there are ways to do it, such as using hide and create a diversion, and I've gone over the latter in one of my skill actions videos, which I'll link to in the description. I really don't think I can exaggerate how powerful off guard actually is. Spending an action just to move into position is almost always worth doing, even if it's at the end of your turn. Off guard really is that powerful. Alrighty. Initiative is one of those things that some players think is essential and some players think is not all that important. And I have a counter argument to those points. It is essential. It just is. So why is initiative so important, Dominic of the Dominomicon? Well, aren't you lovely for asking? Okay, it's because in PF2E, it's not all that hard to get a critical hit. And that's even ignoring things like surprise attack from the rogue. The point of this is that because of how the crits work in this system, it's drastically more likely that you're going to kill an enemy before they can act if you go before them than in most systems. Yeah, it's not going to happen in the majority of cases, but there's a good chance that in an encounter, one of the enemies is going to be somewhat weak, and you could just immediately rush it and kill the crap out of it. And by doing this, you've completely stopped that enemy's actions, and one of those actions could have been a crit against one of your allies or even yourself. And that's why initiative is incredibly important in this system, and the fact that you can just do a free passive action like Scout to increase the chances of you being able to one-shot an enemy before they've even done anything is kind of insane. To top that off, getting abilities such as Incredible Initiative is going to be very important. And I'd also say that healer classes, and I have said this before, are actually the best ones, aside from probably the rogue, to get better initiative abilities. As in, if you're a healer, you might want to focus on getting some abilities that increase your initiative, because healers tend to spend their actions, well, healing. But if they go before all the other players and before the enemies, they can get an effect down like Bless or something like that, or even throw a dodgy fireball at one of the enemies before anyone else can act. And then on the second turn, they can run around healing people. So yes, do not dismiss initiative. It's very important in this system. Next up, if you've ever found yourself with one action left at the end of your turn and you're not entirely sure what to do, you should be doing one of two things: using aid or recalling knowledge. I cannot exaggerate how powerful that +1 is going to be in certain situations, and do not get me started on recall knowledge because it is quite frankly the most powerful basic action in the entire system. I said that last bit a little bit weird. The reason for both of these actions being incredibly good is because of how the system itself is designed. We already know about the 4 degrees of success, and that's why aid can be incredibly powerful, especially if you get a critical success on it, because giving someone a +2 to the next attack roll or skill action could change an entire encounter. As for recall knowledge, just bear in mind this very important point. Almost every single enemy in PF2E has some sort of unique ability, weakness, resistance, something. They always have something. And understanding what that particular something is might be the difference between life and death in a fight, or a very difficult encounter to an incredibly easy one. If you happen to find out what an enemy's weakness is, and it was something you never considered before, and you have it available as one of your abilities, actions, whatever, or one of your party members does, you've just massively reduced the difficulty of that fight. And finding out about an enemy's unique ability means that if they do have one of those 3 action combo things I mentioned before, you can make steps to avoid it. Do not sleep on these 2 basic actions, especially if you have an extra action free and you're not sure what to do with it. Moving on. Unlike in most other TTRPGs, your AC in this one is all about avoiding critical hits, not normal hits. That's not to say it doesn't help with normal hits, because of course having that higher AC definitely does help, but if you're intending to play a character that never gets hit, well, you might be better off focusing on avoiding crits instead. And this is why doing things like raising shield and taking weapons with the parry trait, or even using the dueling cape, can be very important for certain situations. And taking cover in particular can be essential to surviving and avoiding critical hits, and I said it in a previous video, which again I'll link to in the description, but being able to increase your AC by up to 4 for one action is absolutely something you can do in this system by simply taking cover. And if you get attacked with ranged abilities, even standing behind an ally could give you a +1 to your AC. Again, always remember the 4 degrees of success, and whenever it's possible to just gain a teeny tiny bit of AC, so long as it's not massively screwing you over in other ways, it's going to be worth it. So yes, a good AC is about avoiding crits and not hits. Let's keep going. Some players agonize about when they should and shouldn't use hero points, and I really don't think it's all that complicated. The best thing that you can do with hero points is always keep one on you whenever possible for extremely clutch moments. This is because you can use a hero point to stabilize yourself when you're dying on the ground. Other than those situations, it's worth saving one in case you roll a natural 1 in an extremely clutch situation. And if you have over 1 hero point stockpiled, I would consider using it the next time you roll under maybe a 3. Obviously, this does depend on how generous your GM is with hero points, and every table is going to be slightly different there, but generally keeping hold of one for dire situations is really going to help you out. Next. This is another one of those things that sort of relates to my first point about character creation. If you're the type of person that gets overwhelmed with feat choices and can spend hours agonizing over them because you're terrified you'll pick the wrong one, you really don't have to be this way in this system. First of all, there's a thing called retraining, and it's built into the system itself. You can spend a week of downtime changing one of your feat selections. Of course, it has to make sense for your character, and you cannot really change things that are like genetic or whatever, but generally you don't have to worry too much about these selections. And if that's not good enough, what I do is I just read through each feat in each feat category as they become available, and I rule things out as I go. And I do this with two major things in mind. First of all, if an ability looks confusing, just skip it. More than likely, it's probably niche. And the second point is you need to question, does this suit my character concept? Can I imagine my character doing this particular thing, etc.? In my opinion, this drastically simplifies things, and in this system, you don't actually have to understand absolutely everything for it to work for you. Remember this idiom, perfect is the enemy of good. Okay, let's keep going. Again, this can kind of come down to the whole character concept thing again, but if you're only ever building a character with combat in mind, you might struggle a little bit with certain aspects of this system. Crafting, diplomacy, society, and medicine in particular are incredibly important skills to have proficiency in. Just bear in mind that this game is very teamwork oriented, so as long as one of you've got it in the party, generally you'll be alright. But yeah, having those non-combat skills can be very important, and it can also let your character shine in roleplay moments. Just bear in mind that the system actually recommends that GMs give out experience points even if the party doesn't have an actual experience. So like when you diffuse a situation using diplomacy, or when you avoid a trap rather than disarming it, that means you would get experience points. So this means that you're effectively leveling up and progressing within the system without being in combat at all, which is just one of the reasons why non-combat skills can be so important. And this is regardless of whether you're using milestone leveling or not. Non-combat skills are just very important to have. Oh, and do not snooze on lore skills. Every time you use one, the DC is typically lower just because it's a very specific sort of skill, and these types of skills can really make your character stand out as well because they're usually unique to one character in a party. So try to invest in one or two non-combat skills and you'll have a much better time with the system if you do so. Last but not least, right, if you've never heard the phrase white room mentality before, it basically means building your character around a super specific set of perfect conditions. Like, you take a particular combo of feats that in theory work together beautifully, but only if a bunch of things happen in a very particular way. The problem is, Pathfinder 2e doesn't do white room theory. Those perfect conditions basically rarely or never show up in actual play, and even when they do, it's usually not often enough to justify how niche and situational your entire build has become. Now, without trying to rag on D&D 5e too much, this way of thinking does come up a lot in that system, from what I've heard anyway, mostly because enemy AC tends to be lower across the board, and characters can pull off more reliable combos more often. So some players coming from that system might bring all that mindset into PF2e, but that isn't how this system works. Paizo has pretty much stated that they don't design classes with those kinds of perfect white room setups in mind, and trying to force that kind of thinking into PF2e could potentially make your character worse, not better. Pathfinder's got lots and lots of stuff going on at any moment, and making consistent, reliable choices rather than gambling everything on an unbelievably perfect mega turn that might never come is how you're meant to do things. When you build for just one awesomely awesome moment, you miss out on all those scenarios and dozens of other encounters where a normal, more reliable build would have been excellent to play as. So yeah, don't fall into the trap of trying to build for those ridiculous one-shot moments that may never actually happen. You'll have a lot more fun and probably perform better by just building a character around a cool concept and grabbing feats that suit that concept itself. And I'm going to add a personal note here. If my group built lots of characters that were super duper overpowered, somehow managed to find a way to kind of break the system, even if I was running an adventure path, what I would do is I would scale up the encounter difficulty. That's because this isn't a video game and you want your players to be challenged. That's like one of the whole points of being a GM and running a TTRPG. So yeah, maybe you could spend hours and hours and hours building the most perfect character, but then the GM might just compensate for that by scaling up the encounter difficulty, and then you have just basically wasted all that time making an awesome character that is not all that interesting to play as from a roleplay perspective, and for what? Just bear stuff like that in mind when you're looking at the whole white room mentality. Okay, that's my top 10 general tips for players in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Hopefully even advanced players will have learned a thing or two. As ever, if you found this video helpful and or enjoyable, please give it a like and consider subscribing, and pop down in the comments what you think are essential tips for players in this system that I may have missed. I do love to hear your suggestions. And a shout out to Max Magnus 20019 for being the first member and archivist of the Dominomicon. I really appreciate the support. If you want your name to appear here as well and get a couple of emojis and other stuff in the future, please consider pressing that join button. But for now, this is Dominic of the Dominomicon wishing you a fond farewell, and until next time, goodbye.